All right, team, welcome to another episode of the Exceptional Leadership Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Matt Hamilton. Delighted to have your company with me once again from wherever you might be listening to the show from around the world. A big warm welcome to those listeners joining us from the United States of America. So good to have you guys on board. It's been awesome to see new listeners flowing in from that part of the world. And of course, those here locally in Australia and our friends in Europe and Asia as well. It is really quite a diverse listener base. And indeed, they are joining us from all over the world. So good to have everybody here. Looking to improve their leadership together. It is really, really cool. Guys, before I begin, what I will encourage you to do, just realizing that obviously 2 weeks between episodes might be a little bit long for some of you to wait, and maybe you want some more content. Look, I do need that time between episodes to generate ideas and to come across as fresh and engaging. But what I would encourage you to do is, if you want more, do have a look at the catalog, the back catalog of the show. So this is episode number 66. If you go all the way back to episode number 1, it's a really good episode right off the bat about having difficult conversations, and then every single leadership topic you can imagine from episodes 1 through to this one, 66. So if you haven't checked out those earlier episodes and you're thirsty for some more content, I do encourage you between now and the next episode to go back and have a look at those episodes if you'd like to get some more listening under your belt. There's a lot of good stuff there, so I would encourage you to have a look. Now guys, without further ado, we'll get to today's topic, which is change management. And this is a tricky one because it's a very, very difficult thing to execute well on a large scale. And your experience, and then by association, your set of responsibilities as well, is somewhat determined by your position in the company. If you're right at the top and you're developing the strategy, of course, you're in charge of a different remit. You have a different set of responsibilities in that setting, as opposed to someone, for example, who is in middle management, who's not setting the strategy, who's not rolling out the change. Instead, someone in that position is in charge of communicating the message down from the top and translating it into something that makes sense for those on the floor, and then keeping those people engaged and motivated and emotionally level as the change rolls out. And I focus on the word emotional there and the term emotionally level because that is one of the most difficult things to do during a really substantial change process. And what we're going to do is have a look at an example from history, which I think will illustrate that point very nicely, and then we will get into some thoughts on the topic. But today we'll set the scene by going all the way back to the 1980s, the early 1980s in fact. We'll have a look at a story from Coca-Cola, and we'll see how they managed a relatively big change and all of the dilemmas that arose as a result. Here we go. In the early 1980s, Coca-Cola faced a quiet crisis. Pepsi, its longtime rival, was gaining ground, especially among younger drinkers. Inside Coca-Cola's sleek headquarters, executives and scientists believed that they had a solution, and that was a new, sweeter formula that had tasted better in taste trials than both classic Coke and Pepsi. The plan seemed brilliant on paper: replace the old formula nationwide, win back the market, and reaffirm Coca-Cola's dominance. So on April 23, 1985, New Coke was launched with fanfare. Executives celebrated in conference rooms, confident that the taste tests had predicted consumer delight and that there was going to be some truth to that. But almost immediately, it seemed a storm was brewing. Letters poured in from angry customers, families called radio stations, and news outlets ran stories about the Coke crisis. People didn't just dislike New Coke, they felt betrayed. This wasn't just a soft drink, it was a cultural icon, tied to childhood memories, holidays, and daily rituals. Consumers weren't merely buying a beverage. They were buying a piece of nostalgia. Inside Coca-Cola, employees were blindsided. Customer service teams bore the brunt of complaints. Morale dropped. Staff who had been proud to work for the company now fielded irate calls, and whispers of doubt began to circulate in the hallways. Leaders realised that their carefully crafted strategy had actually misread the human element entirely. In a frantic scramble to regain trust, Coca-Cola acted. Just 79 days after the launch, the company announced the return of the original formula, and that was now branded Coca-Cola Classic. Executives issued public apologies and flooded marketing channels with reassurance. The Coke people loved was back. Slowly the storm subsided and customer loyalty returned, although Coca-Cola had learned a humbling lesson. From the outside, it might have looked like a minor product tweak gone wrong, but internally, it was a masterclass in change management gone awry. Quantitative data had overshadowed emotional intelligence, and rapid implementation had left no room for stakeholder voices. The company recovered, but only because it recognised its mistakes, acted decisively, and honoured the human connection that underpins every brand. Now, there was a phrase in that write-up that really caught my eye, and that was the human element. The human element, really problematic if you misread it, but absolutely bound to be of significant importance in any change management piece. But before we get into my specific thoughts on that, I want to start at the beginning by asking you a question. That is, what does change that is good change management look like? What does it mean to you? Because there's a difference between the reality of what's going to occur and the problems that we're going to face versus our ideal version of that. Right? You can write up a change management plan on paper. You can have all these ideas of how things will slip into place. But then reality comes quickly and checks us. Now, the reality is that when we implement change, especially broad-scale change, we'll encounter politics, anxiety, fear, stubbornness, and sometimes incompetence. Change isn't always managed well. That's a reality. And there's one thing certain, and that is uncertainty. It doesn't matter how competent you are as a leader and a manager. It doesn't matter how watertight your plan is. The very fact that you are effecting change will bring about uncertainty, regardless of how good at it you are, regardless of how much you've planned. So we need to be ready for that, not only at the very top levels where we're the ones who are actually planning and implementing and driving the change, but at those middle management levels, which I suspect most of us in this listener base probably fall, right? Those of us in middle management have the job of keeping the ship steady. Now, that job can be made a lot harder depending on the competency of the individuals above you and how they choose to roll out this process. But nevertheless, regardless of that, we're in that boat and we are tasked with trying to keep people level, focused, engaged, and emotionally stable. You know, one of the things you will notice during big periods of change in organisations, and I've been through many of them, one of the things you will notice is there's usually a very high turnover rate. You know, people have a low tolerance for change and often jump ship. And ironically, not because of anything caused by the change, just because of all the uncertainty and the emotional baggage that comes with it. So we need to be prepared for that, regardless of where we sit with respect to our leadership rank. So uncertainty is the only certainty. Now, to my way of thinking, and this is just based on my experience, I think it's important that we are open to change and we preach the need for change at every level of leadership because we don't want to be stagnant. Yes, we absolutely have to adapt or we die, right? Evolution is required in every organisation. But there might be some wisdom in thinking about how much we decide to change at once and ensuring that we pick our battles. And the Coca-Cola example is a really, really good one. The human element was drastically forgotten. They didn't take it into account. And then had to roll back all of the hard work that they'd done to the status quo, essentially. Think of how much time and money was lost as a result of that. How much stress was caused that maybe didn't need to be. How much difficulty was brought about that could have been avoided, perhaps through some better planning and maybe a more empathetic outlook by catering to the human element that is at the centre of almost everything we do as leaders. So yeah, preach the need for change, for sure. We need to evolve or we die. But consult broadly before implementing any change and pick those battles really carefully. And then roll out gradually. So we don't want to change too much at once. And then when we do want to roll out the change, we want to learn from it. You know, I like the term launch, learn and develop. Okay? Be prepared to take on feedback after you've launched the change so that you can go back to the drawing board, tweak it and put out a second version of whatever plan you were looking to implement, whether it be a new system, procedure, whatever. Be prepared to take on board feedback and issue a version 2. Because it's very likely that you'll have to. And if we do that, and we do it well, we win trust. But I want to circle back to the initial point that I made, which is that no matter how well you do it, you're going to encounter difficulty. All those things, politics, anxiety, fear, stubbornness, all those things. Change is very difficult to do well, and that is why I would suggest don't change too much at once. Focus on small, high-value areas. And when you've got the runs on the board, so to speak, when you can point to successful change experiences under your leadership to those that you lead, it might be easier to bring them along for the next little bit of change that you want to make. So there's a little bit of the tactician at play here as well at the leadership level. Trust, at the end of the day, folks, is won through results and only that. It's a simple game in many ways. Leaders are judged by their results. But as I mentioned, our role differs by the level that we find ourselves at within the organisation while this change piece is underway. So our responsibilities are different. Let's have a look at the middle management ranks. And as I said, that's where I suspect most of us will find ourselves. If you're in middle management, you're a leader that faces the challenge of dealing with the fallout of all the employee tension that comes as a result of change. You will find yourself having to double down again and again and again on your communication to reassure people. You'll see differences in personalities emerge. Some people will appear to be relatively unbothered or not that willing to express it. Other people will become anxious wrecks as a result of not knowing how things are going to shake out. This is broad scale change we're talking about, right? So restructures and things like that, all very, very common. And it can be very difficult in the middle management ranks to deal with this, well, because you're in a position where you don't have all the answers yourself. So it really is a place of some nuance. But what I would say to you if you find yourself in that position is you have to double down on communication. Go and have a look at all the literature on this topic. Go and speak to anybody who's been involved in this multiple times, and they will tell you that the one thing that seems to suffer is communication. Things get convoluted, you know. It's like when you tell someone something at the top of a line and ask them to repeat it. By the time it gets to the other end of the line and it's had multiple people, the comms has been distributed over. It ends up being a bastardized version of the original message. And never has that been more true when it comes to organizations and change management processes. But what about if you're at the top? What about if you're the one who is implementing the change and driving all this? Well, guess what? Still, the key thing remains communication. It's the cornerstone, regardless of the level of leadership you find yourself at. You have to communicate the goals of the change, the reasons for the change clearly so that people understand it. And if you lead a group of intelligent people, and let's face it, we want to be the best that we can be in our organizations, don't we? So it's likely that we've hired a lot of intelligent people who are good at their jobs. They're rightly going to put their critical thinking caps on, and they're probably going to ask some really good questions. So we need to be prepared to answer those in a way that puts their concerns to bed. Consultation, very, very valuable. And of course, planning. And having well-reasoned answers as to why you're doing what you're doing. Got to make sure the plan's watertight. And things can come unstuck if you haven't consulted enough with respect to that plan. It is quite possible that if you sit at the top in the ivory tower, so to speak, and you don't really get to know how your business works, and you don't think about the human element, and you don't make those connections and seek out that understanding before making decisions around broad scale change, you might actually end up with a lot of blind spots. And so you'll end up with all this communication from people who do this day in, day out on the ground level. And it might highlight some gaps in your plan. And all of that could be avoided if you'd just done some good quality consultation at the beginning of the process before deciding what you wanted to do. And the Coca-Cola example, again, is a great example of that on a simple scale, a new product release. So we've got to ensure our plan's watertight, and talking to people is a really good way to do that. But I want to zero in on the word consultation, because here is something that I've also seen. You can have not enough consultation, but you can also have too much. And this is why change is such a beast. It is such a difficult thing to do well. All the complexities of leadership coming together in one. You can consult too much because everybody's got a different opinion. And as a leader, you need to decipher between what is a well-informed opinion and what is someone just grumbling. What is someone just blowing off steam versus a well-reasoned bit of feedback that you should listen to. And if you consult to the point where you listen to everything from everyone and you try and tailor a plan around that, you will inevitably feel like you're not getting anywhere. Why? Because there will never be a consensus. lots of people think lots of different things. So trying to work out who's right and trying to please everybody is a fool's errand, as they say. You need to consult to a point, but be very selective about the people you're consulting. Make sure that they're in a position to know what they're talking about before you base your plan of action on feedback. We don't want to get bogged down. We don't want change to drag out forever. And one of the ways that that happens is by consulting too much. And then we find ourselves, dare I say it, in a position of decision paralysis, because we're asking every man and his dog what he thinks should happen. And oftentimes, those people aren't in a position to have an educated opinion. That sounds harsh, I know, but it's true. We need to make sure that we're asking the right people, all right? Otherwise, we won't go anywhere. But a part of our planning, and I'll close on this, a part of our planning has to be fallout response. If we have a look at that Coke example, they miss the human element, as I've said multiple times now. I think a glaring example of that was the planning for a fallout. What if this doesn't go well? What if we do have negative feedback? What if someone does raise a question and actually it's a really good point and we haven't thought about it and we want to change our mind based on that feedback? What do we do? Are we committed? Are we too full steam ahead to hit the brakes and change our minds? We have to be open to the possibility that we haven't got everything right, and that if something really compelling comes up, we have the ability to stop the process, make the changes, recalibrate, and then get back on track. If that's not a part of our planning, we could find ourselves in a position where we do the business damage, we waste a bunch of time, and we implement something that is substandard. That's the reality. So we need to, when we're developing these plans around change management, when we're implementing change, and this doesn't matter whether we're talking company-wide level change or just change within your team as a lower level manager. You know, you might want to roll out a new system in your team, a new process. Doesn't matter, it works at every level. The concept is the same. Make sure you plan for those tricky situations where perhaps it doesn't go as smoothly as you wanted it to, or you find yourself in a position where actually to get a great result and to make all this worthwhile, we need to pivot pretty substantially and change our approach. Plan for it. Plan all the way to the end, okay? Rarely does everything go beautifully first time around, so make sure that your plan includes the ability to mitigate things like that occurring, because I can guarantee you they probably will. Change is messy, change is difficult, and there's a reason that it is rarely done well. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. I would encourage you, as I always do, to leave the show a 5-star review, and of course hit that follow button. No matter the podcast app that you use, it does make a huge difference with respect to the discoverability of the show. So please hit the follow button, subscribe, leave a comment if there is something that you want me to talk about that perhaps I haven't quite covered in the 66 episodes to date. Drop me a comment on whatever podcast app you use and I'll read them, and we can maybe tweak an upcoming episode to cover off on something that you raise. I really do value your engagement. But until next time, crew, stay safe and I'll see you later.